Today, the topic is the setback factory. And again, I'm talking to three different feeds here. So if you see my eye contact moving between three cameras, it's nothing personal. I'm just trying to make eye contact with three different people. So today's topic is about setbacks and expectations. So I work with a lot of people who experience setbacks of one kind or another. And many types of setbacks come at you out of the blue. Things like divorces or bereavement, when you suffer the loss of a loved one, or you show up for work one day to discover that layoffs have been announced. Okay, these are the types of setbacks that are outside of your control. But there's a whole other class of setbacks, of kind of consistent letdowns that we experience that have much to do with our own expectations of the way we think things ought to look, or the way we think things ought to go for us, or the way we deserve things to go for us. And so we actually have a hand in this other class of setbacks. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. Because if we approach those types of expectations and setbacks the wrong way, then we can set ourselves up to really experience them over and over again and bring a setback factory online. And what we'll do today is explore a little bit how that happens and how we can adjust our expectations so that we can produce more ease and gratification in our lives and less disappointment. And I see a few people have joined us since we've begun. Can't see everyone's names. I see Catherine here. And just as hi Catherine, thank you for joining. And just as a quick recap, I've got Facebook Right Life Project page over here, my Jim York page here, and my Instagram feed up here. So if you see me shifting my eye contact, that's why. I'm trying to pull off this technological achievement by doing 3 different live streams at once. So, this word expectations is really kind of a bad word in some ways in our society. I hear people basically advising people to just not have any expectations at all. Just let go of expectations. There's your problem. You expected something out of life. And what I'd like to suggest is that that's not true, that that's conventional wisdom. And as with most conventional wisdom, I think it's a little simple-minded, oversimplified. And so what I think is the reality is that there's a broad range of types of expectations that we have, some of which are healthier and more appropriate than others. So on the one hand, you've got some types of expectations that you'd be crazy if you didn't have them. So for instance, you probably expect the sun to rise tomorrow, right? And that's a fully appropriate type of expectation. And to just say that we're never going to expect anything really flies in the face of the way our brains are wired. Our brains collect data from our lives and then project futures based on those observations. And so it is, it believes that the sun's going to rise tomorrow, and you know what? It's right. And so those types of expectations, really, there's nothing wrong with them. Then you have ones that are more in a gray area. So here's some examples of these. So if I didn't commit a crime, then I shouldn't be convicted of a crime or go to prison for a crime, right? I shouldn't be wrongly convicted or imprisoned. Okay, so this one is maybe it's healthy, right? But it's also a gray area. It's not quite as cut and dried as the sun will always rise in the east. Okay, here's another example. That in my relationship with my partner, there should always be an equal division of labor. Okay, so this is another expectation. And note that it has the word should in it. Anytime you hear the word should in your mind, let that be a little red flag, because shoulds tend to be someone else's voice rather than your own. So when you hear should, pause and question the belief that you're listening to. Okay. Let's see, what's another example? Oh, if I work hard, then I expect to get a raise or a promotion. Okay. Or here's one that I personally wrestle with quite a bit, that other people should do their jobs well. Okay. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced the frustration of being on the phone with customer service representatives who don't really seem to care about their job or know what they're doing. I do. It happens all the time. It drives me a little bit crazy. But recently I had this experience that was really kind of on the extreme end, I think, of bad customer service or bad retail experiences. So a couple of years, well, it wasn't recent, it was a couple of years ago, I was setting up a new office and outfitting it with new furniture. And there was this desk that I really liked a lot that I wanted for my office, available through not some fly-by-night, mom and pop operator, but a national furnishing store that I guess I shouldn't name. And so I picked this out, ordered it, it took several weeks for it to arrive, and I had to block out a whole half day of time to be available for this thing to arrive. And when it did, in this 400-pound box, I'd pry it open, get inside, just to find that the top of the desk has a big scratch in it. Oh man. Well, so I had to arrange for them to come back, pack the thing up, take it back, and then bring another desk back. So I did that, only to find that that desk too had a scratch on the top of it. Well, how unlucky can I be? I thought. Third time must be a charm. Tried it a third time. Now I've now spent 2 full days of my life waiting for these desks to arrive, just to find that it too was damaged. This happened 6 times. 6 times. And now this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine. And again, this is kind of an extreme example, but I started thinking, what in the world is wrong with people? Who makes furniture and then puts, sees that it's damaged, puts it in a box and ships it off to the customer? I don't know how that sort of thing happens, but finally I made up my mind that I've had enough of this, and I set a boundary for myself, found a new desk that I liked, not as much, but I liked it well enough, got that, and it arrived and it was fine. So I think that, in situations like that, actually I think that comes from my grandfather, because he was a house painter, and he was really old school. He came from the old country, took a lot of pride in his work. And I think maybe I was kind of infused with that as a kid, and like to see that in other people. But if I go through the world thinking that everyone should take pride in their work, and that there should be a sort of a pride of craftsmanship in everything that we do, then I'm bound to be disappointed again and again and again. And if you aren't careful, you can kind of slip down this rabbit hole where first you order the desk and it arrives damaged, and you think, geez, what's this world coming to? And then you get on the phone to call the customer service people, and maybe they don't do their jobs well. Now you're even more frustrated. And then you go to Starbucks and they write the wrong name on the cup or whatever. And you can start to become oriented to the way things don't work, the way things don't feel good for you, and maybe start feeling indignant and speaking up all the time. And before you know it, if you aren't careful, you can kind of fall down this rabbit hole and become a real sourpuss, a real crank, kind of shaking your fist at the world. What's this world coming to? In my day, things weren't like this. And while those points of view may be valid, they also can leave you as a sort of unpleasant person to be around. Okay, so that's one risk of sort of buying into expectations like that. Okay. Then at the other end of the spectrum, so we started off with the expecting sunrises. Okay, well, of course you do. Then some of these that are more gray. And then my final example is, let's say that someone has the expectation of having finding a prince and having a royal wedding and marrying a prince and becoming a princess. Okay, this is one that on its face is probably a pretty risky expectation or assumption to have, right? Because we just know that it's pretty unlikely. So it's pretty likely to result in disappointment. So if you look at all these examples I gave you, they have some things in common. One is that they're focused on some kind of external outcome. The big word for that is an external locus of control, but it's focusing on something that's outside of you, okay, and that carries with it a risk of disappointment or some kind of setback. Now, the only one that doesn't of those examples is the sunrise, because look, we know the sun is going to rise. But the only reason that's the case is because we just aren't going to live long enough, right? If we did live long enough, there will come a time when the sun will burn out or it'll engulf the earth or whatever. And so even that ultimately is not really dependable, right? It's still outside of ourselves, and we're pinning our well-being to something that is outside of us. And that is inherently risky. Now, all these other examples also have in common that they're comparing your current situation to an ideal situation that you have envisioned in your mind, right? That so you have a vision of how life should be, and you're taking that minus your reality and then coming away with a negative value and feeling disappointed. And also, all these examples depend at least as much on someone else's behavior as they do on your own. So you're also then putting faith or ceding control of the way you feel to someone else's decisions and behaviors. Okay, so given all that, then there are some problems with having these expectations. Okay, one is that this ideal image that you have in your mind may or may not be a realistic scenario to achieve. Okay, two, it may be something that you never have. You may or may not ever have that ideal scenario. So essentially then what you're doing is comparing your current situation to what is really a figment of your imagination. Okay, so hold that thought. Now, three, that these are outside of your control. Okay, so that can put you on a sort of a tightrope where you have disappointment and setbacks on either side. And four, what I want to spend a few minutes talking about is that if that vision of yours isn't grounded in your core self, then even if you did get it, it might not lead to the kind of happiness or gratification that you hope it would. Okay, this is a really important point. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by the core self. What I'm talking about are these intrinsic, intangible, subjective values, okay, that really make you tick, that make you get out of bed and take an interest in the day, that that you find valuable or interesting or entertaining for their own sake, not because they lead to some other outcome that you're really looking for, but because in and of themselves, they help you to feel good. They give you warm fuzzies, okay? So, or the opposite, that it's something you want to move away from because there's just this gut kind of, goes whoever the opposite of warm fuzzies is. So the cold smooths, I guess, right? So these are things that only you know if you have, okay? They're not externally defined. They're not visible to other people. You and you alone know if you have them or don't have them. So these are what intrinsic values are. Versus extrinsic ones, okay? Things that you can see and touch. You know, it's funny, just this morning I was watching this morning show that we have here in the States. It's on CBS, it's CBS Sunday Morning. And they were doing this profile of Japanese pizza places that are doing these wonderful Neapolitan pizzas that are at least as good as the ones in Italy, apparently. And it's kind of this improbable thing, but there's this whole kind of subculture in Japan to make these good pizzas. And what they were saying is that in Japan, you know, the measure of esteem or the measure of success for someone in that culture is the degree of commitment they have to what they do, that they're striving for perfection, they're striving to do a good job. In this case, they're striving to make the very best pizza possible and deliver it to the customer, as opposed to, you know, the winner is the one who sells the most pizzas, okay? And I think that's a great illustration of a couple things I've already talked about. that kind of intrinsic motivation to just do the right thing, really, okay, is what the core self would be. Those are the intrinsic values. Now, it turns out that if you do that, you know what? You're likely to sell more pizzas anyway, right? So the problem is that we often get this backwards, and we end up striving for the extrinsic rewards, the tangible things, and neglecting the intrinsic ones. And when we get it backwards, then we get into trouble. So unlike these concrete objectives, okay, that we can get tangled up in, the intrinsic core values that we're shooting for, they're inexhaustible. And what this means is that if you set those as your goal, if you set your sights on those, you never run out of room to work toward them, okay? It's not like there's a finish line that you reach and now I'm done. So how does this tie to expectations? Well, it's not as sort of complicated as I might be making it sound. It's not really mystical. And in fact, the intrinsic qualities of the expectations that you have are probably right there in front of you. Okay, so let's go back to some of the examples I gave. We can see for ourselves. Okay, so one example I gave was, if I haven't committed a crime, then I shouldn't be convicted and imprisoned of a crime, right? Okay, now of course we all want that. We all want to not go to prison for no reason. But if that's extrinsic, that's an external outcome. Beneath the surface, what's there? Okay, well, it could be different things to different people, but one thing it might be is a desire for justice to be done, or a sort of craving for fairness as opposed to injustice and unfairness, right? So maybe justice and fairness for oneself or in the world is something that's important to this person, okay? So making this shift toward that intrinsic motivator, doesn't mean that the worst won't happen, that you won't be wrongfully convicted someday. That still could happen. But what it does mean is that if it does happen to you, that doesn't have to be the end of the story for you. Okay? You should, if you haven't seen it already, you should watch The Shawshank Redemption, and the movie's all about that, really. It's this intrinsic value of hope being kept alive even through this wrongful conviction. So now, putting aside this rare event of being wrongfully convicted, the other benefit of sort of reorienting toward this intrinsic value of yours is that in your day-to-day life, there are plenty of ways that you can work toward embodying justice and fairness in your own life, or fighting for it for other people, okay? So this is something that you can have in your day-to-day life. So that's the value, the kind of secondary benefit of this. Okay, now, what about the example of, in a relationship, there should be an equal division of labor? Okay, if I take out the garbage, then you should do the laundry. Okay, again, notice how these are very extrinsic. These are concrete measures. Underneath, what might that person be looking for? Again, this is going to vary by person, but it could be that a sense of connection with the partner, or a sense of teamwork is something that they value. Okay, well, this is an important distinction then, right? Now look, this still depends on the other person's partner, right? Because it's a relationship, of course, there's two people involved. But when your goal is to have connection and teamwork in a relationship, well, now there's a lot more options available to you, right? Because there's a lot of ways to have those things that may or may not have to do with the garbage and the laundry. And so when you take that broader perspective, what you might find is that your needs are actually being met, but maybe just in different ways, because you've been so fixated on this one detail that maybe you aren't noticing how in these other three ways, actually there is some teamwork on display, right? Or there is some connection. Or maybe the other person is actually also on the same page with you. They like connection and teamwork too, but it just maybe looks or feels different to them. And so the details maybe are on different pages. But the huge realization in this example then is that you're on the same page where it really matters, the underlying core values being the same. Okay, So when that is the case, now you've got the grounds for a dialogue to happen and improvements be made. Another example, this person who says, well, if I work hard, I should get a raise or get a promotion. Okay, well, raises and promotions for many people really represent being recognized, being valued, having one's not just performance, but one's contribution to the world being valued. And so there's an intrinsic value. And if we go one step below that even, to be worthy of being valued by one's employer, say, implies that you're probably good at what you do. So maybe that's a core value too, competence, being good at your chosen profession or vocation. So again, if you live and die by whether or not you get a raise or a promotion, your performance at work is only a part of that equation. The other part is your boss, completely out of your control. If instead you shift toward wanting to experience a feeling of competence in what you do day in and day out, okay, now you're talking, because this is something that you can work at every day and savor every day as well, regardless of what the boss decides about your raise or promotion. Okay, one more example. The example of, I expect to marry a prince and have this royal wedding, okay? Now this is one that we said was pretty far outside of the range, right? This is one that on its face seems pretty risky because it's very unlikely. Okay, that does not mean though that you can't sort of mine it for intrinsic motivation though. So what could that be? Well, so if you look just under the surface, then it might be that this person wants to feel adored or wants to feel really special, like the most important person in the world to someone else, right? Okay, again, so this is hugely important, and this is really good news for that person, right? Because now what we're talking about then is cultivating a relationship with someone who values and adores you, like, which could be lots of people, as opposed to waiting for lightning to strike Kate Middleton or Meghan Markle, one of those, and so that you can kind of swoop in and take their place, because it's like winning the lottery, right? If you're talking about really just being seen and gotten and treasured by another person, that's something else. That's achievable. That's something you can work on, and not just your romantic life, but in your friendships and other relationships in life. Okay. So in all these examples, what I'm not saying, to be clear, is that you should just do some sort of mind game on yourself so that you can just get comfortable with the way things are and settle for whatever you currently have, even if those things aren't good or healthy or fun. And that's not at all what I'm saying. Sometimes you have to end relationships because they're toxic. Sometimes you need to leave jobs because they aren't a good fit for your skills or your goals. Sometimes you're wrongfully convicted, and sometimes you have to spend years appealing those convictions or tunneling out through the sewer like in Shawshank. And sometimes you get 6 scratched desks in a row, and you have to figure out what to do next. In my case, order a new desk, right? So here's what I am suggesting, which is that you assess your current situation, whatever situation it is where you feel some friction. Okay, thank you, Tawanda. Assess the current situation that you have in light of your intrinsic needs and wants and abilities, and not comparing it to the way that you always hoped things would look. Okay, so the question that you're answering in this determination is not, is this my ideal situation, or is this the best I can do, or does this situation look the way I always thought it would look, right? What I'm suggesting is that these are the wrong questions to ask yourself, and that maybe you should let go of that comparison, okay? Because it's the, do I deserve better? or I shouldn't have to put up with this, or this isn't how it's supposed to be. Those are the questions and beliefs that cause us to suffer. You know, that's how it was with the desks, right? Having the scratched desk is one thing. Shaking your fist at the world with this kind of righteous indignation that, boy, you know, the whole world's going to hell because no one will do their job right. Okay, that's suffering. That's self-inflicted suffering on top of what's just a scratched desk, okay? So letting go of that comparison, definitely letting go of the shoulds, and instead asking yourself some other questions, okay? Does this situation, as it is right now, work for me? Because it might look very different than you ever imagined it looking and still work for you. Okay, that's the real question. Okay. Does this situation feel the way that I want it to feel? Not how you thought it would feel or hoped it would feel. Kind of irrelevant. Does it feel the way I currently want to feel? Okay. You know, these aren't black and white questions, right? So you can ask yourself, you can get more granular as you ask yourself these questions. Are there aspects of this situation in which I feel at ease, enlivened, energized, happy? Okay, because those are when you get the warm fuzzies. Okay, those are some emotions that go along with the warm fuzzies. Okay, so, and conversely, are there kind of the flip side, are the parts of this that don't feel good for me? That's how I tend to make decisions like this. Okay, it's not using these artificial kind of arbitrary yardsticks, but really turning inward. Okay, how does this feel? Am I getting warm fuzzies here, or the cold, what do we call it? The cold balds, cold hairlesses. Okay. 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 So after you've asked yourself these questions, then before you make a big decision, really make an effort to turn your orientation toward those intrinsics and then act on them before you make any decisions about kind of changing course. So instead of complaining about what you don't have, how the current situation doesn't feel good for you, instead speak up and recognize, both to yourself internally and out loud to any other people that might be in this situation, whether it's at work or a social relationship or what have you. But verbalize to yourself and someone else what's going on right now that feels good, that feels right, that is kind of checking off boxes for you. Okay? So, you know, just the other day, you know, I didn't really do this with the furniture manufacturer. I have to say, after 6, I was kind of done communicating with them altogether. But 2-3 days ago, I was at the grocery store, and the grocery bagger gentleman did a great job. You know, I've been in there before where they put my chips on the bottom and then throw like a half gallon of milk on top, and then like you can hear them all crush in the bag right there. It's like, what are you doing? But the other day, this guy did a great job. Like, he was very conscientious, you know, about, you know, packing it just so, kind of like they used to do. I remember when I was a kid, it was sort of a specialty to, like, you know, pack a grocery bag properly. And this guy is a young guy too, did it and like took care to make sure my stuff didn't get damaged. And so I complimented him. I said, "Wow, like you're old school, man. You're a pro at this." You know, and he smiled, and you could tell I don't know, it seemed like he felt good hearing it. So this is a way that you can sort of shift away from just being a crank and complaining about what doesn't feel good, what doesn't fit, and instead shift toward more positivity, really, right? Highlighting other people's good works, highlighting what feels good for you. Okay, and this has a couple of benefits. One, it's positive reinforcement for the other person, so they like hearing that, and so it's more likely that they'll repeat that behavior. And also, it feels good for you, probably, to keep your eyes on what feels good as opposed to what feels bad. Now, if you still feel the need, though, to talk about what you don't have or what's missing, after you do what I just described, you can talk about what you don't have too, but here's an experiment to try. rather than saying, hey, thanks, this feels good when you do this, but this doesn't feel good. Try instead saying, this feels good when you do this, and you know what else I'd like? I'd like it if I could have more of this, okay? Notice how those two different things sound? Because the first one sounds like the person can kind of pick up on the fact that you're setting them up in a way. Oh, this feels good, but watch out because this doesn't feel good. The second version I gave you is this feels good, and I'd like some more of this. I'd like some seconds of this or a helping of this, right? Okay, that has a different tone. That's all positive, even though you're kind of saying the same thing. I want this thing that maybe I don't have, right? But you're just reframing it. So I encourage you to try that as an experiment, okay? Just reframing the way you're verbalizing your needs as a positive rather than a negative or a lack. Finally, I would recommend, if you don't already, trying to assume that other people's intentions are good, okay? And I know this might be getting tougher and tougher these days, with the kind of divisions that we have in our society, at least here in the States, but I think in other countries as well these days. There's a sort of tribalism going on. I think that we're inclined to believe that other people are maybe malintended. But I'll tell you what, in my line of work, I get to meet a lot of different, oh, Liana joined us. Hi, Liana. I get to meet a lot of different types of people. And the way in which I get to meet them in my coaching, and I also have a psychotherapy practice, I get to know people in ways that few other people in their lives know them. And in fact, for some people, I know them better than anyone else, really. And I can tell you this, that very, very few people wake up in the morning with the intention of causing someone else pain. Okay? Sure, it happens sometimes, but that's a really rare thing. What happens all the time is that people are, so caught up in having their own needs met and avoiding discomfort, feeling safe and secure, feeling happy, feeling gratified, that they make sometimes unwise decisions based on those motivations that end up causing themselves and others pain. So again, it's not really the case that I find lots of people are just out to get other people and cause pain and suffering, okay? Like the example I've been talking about with these scratched desks that I got. And for those of you, oh, hi, Lisa, thanks for joining us. I've been using this example of the 6 desks that I ordered. I ordered one 6 times because the first desk came with a scratch on the top. I sent it back, another one arrived, also scratched. 6 desks arrived damaged. Now, I am sure, okay, I'm confident that if the people making that furniture had a perfect world, they would actually like to produce good quality, undamaged furniture and send it out to customers, because they would probably feel good and feel some pride about doing so, okay? But for whatever reason, it's not happening at that factory. And there's probably lots of reasons why, there's quality control or, budgetary issues. I don't know what's going on, but there's probably many different factors that go into them shipping damaged goods. Of all those many factors, though, I can pretty much guarantee you that not one of them is that they want to cheat Jim Yort out of money or sell, Jim a damaged desk, okay? They're not out to screw me or anyone else, okay? There's maybe a lack of focus on quality of product, but that's something else, right? And likewise, if you're in a relationship and your needs aren't getting met, it's probably not because the other person is out to get you somehow. Okay, now if you watch a lot of that show Dateline, you might think differently, right? Because that's all these con men and women, right, that are out to bilk you out of money and hurt you. But again, so that does happen, of course, but it's really the minority. What's probably happening is that the other person maybe doesn't understand your needs and desires, or They might be preoccupied with their own needs and desires. Or maybe they have some kind of history of relational problems or some other kind of history that makes it difficult for them to work with someone else in a relationship. Okay, so there could be lots of different factors, but again, they're probably not waking up in the morning thinking, ooh, how can I cause them pain? Okay, and again, and sometimes relationships also don't work and jobs don't work and you have to leave them. Okay, but that's a topic for a different time. So then just kind of to wrap up then, what I'm suggesting is that you start highlighting in whatever situations in your life where you're feeling this friction, start highlighting what does feel good to you and highlighting that to yourself and then verbalizing it to other people in the situation with you. And then working on expanding that. Work on expanding what feels good and right and is kind of hitting your buttons in a good way. And if you take an approach like this, like the one I'm describing, which is using your internal compass, okay, which is always pointing true north toward your core intrinsic motivators that we're talking about, rather than these external ones, then if you orient toward that, take the approach I'm suggesting, then I think you should feel absolutely free to have all kinds of expectations that you will feel better and happier in the long run, because the research is all really consistent on this. If you have your sights set in the long run on these intrinsic qualities that are important to you, you're much more likely to be happy than if your long-term sights are set on concrete objectives. Okay, so not only that though, but you should expect, if you experiment with this approach a bit, that when you do experience setbacks, disappointments, and you feel let down, that those letdowns won't have as much power to take you down, okay, to really be setbacks for you. Okay, they'll be smaller blips on the radar because you'll be sort of stabilized and oriented toward the things that don't shift overnight. Okay. Okay, so let's see, do we have any comments or questions? Tawanda, thank you. Tawanda says she needed to hear this. Good, I'm glad. Good, I'm glad you're finding it helpful. Yeah, I think a lot of people need to hear this, And what's funny is, what I'm talking about is, it's not rocket science. And we've actually known about a lot of these fundamentals of motivation for decades, since at least, the 80s and 90s. But we're never taught this stuff. And actually, if you, spend time online or spend time watching TV, what you're conditioned to do is to have expectations that are concrete and objective. Okay, that's what makes our economy go. And so we don't hear this, and we're being conditioned kind of in the wrong way, conditioned in a way that is not good for our long-term well-being. One other thing I wanted to mention too is that if you've been watching this video, which was all about setbacks and expectations, and if what I'm saying resonates with you, then you probably would be interested in this new free download that I put together and launched a few weeks ago, which is called the Setback Survival Pack. Okay, so this is a crash course in getting through the sleepless nights and worried days that accompany setbacks that come our way, which can be any number of things, divorce, job loss, layoffs, bereavement, you name it, retirement. Okay, any major life transition can feel like a setback, even ones that we might look forward to, like retirement or the kids leaving home for college, etc. So if you've ever faced a transition, or maybe that you're currently facing one, and you're kind of laying in bed at night, tossing and turning, obsessed with what's going to become of you, and then you wake up the next day exhausted and still obsessed with what's going to become of you, and you just can't break out of this cycle, then the Setback Survival Pack that I have is probably going to be really helpful for you. It's got a bunch of exercises and tools in a PDF guidebook And then I also have video and audio guides to go with it to make sure that you can implement it properly. And it's all totally free. If you go to my website, you can find it and download it right now. It's Jim Hjort, JIMHJORT/setback. Go there and you can find the download, sign up, and get it right now. Okay. And again, please remember to go to the Jim Hjort Facebook page and follow me there. And if you haven't already, follow me on Instagram too. So with that, then I guess I will sign off. Feel free to leave me a note or send me a message when we get off too, and let me know what you thought. I'd love to hear from you, any ideas for future videos or anything like that, okay? So thanks again very much, and I will look forward to seeing you all next time.